throughout the entire semester. You need a 50% semester mark to pass. If you have a 50% semester mark to pass when you enter the exam, it is not that difficult to actually pass the exam. There's somebody on the, sorry, you know what? Somebody just asked on the group why the link isn't there, whereas I literally posted the link. Just want to reply here. Okay, so that's my speech for today, my ranting and raving for the day. Don't cheat, work hard, you're going to pass. Subject isn't difficult. This is a common sense subject. It's not a fancy, complicated law subject. It's in fact a lot easier than commercial law 1A. You are all past commercial law 1A. So just sharing my screen quickly. Just give me a thumbs up if you can see my screen. Okay, Mr. Chunga can see my, okay, everybody can see my screen. Excellent. Okay, so last week we started off by looking at the Namibian Constitution. The Namibian Constitution is the most important law that we have in Namibia. All our other laws are subject to the provisions of the Constitution, have to comply with the Constitution, specifically with the human rights. Now we're taking, for today's lecture, we are taking a step away. We're taking a step back. Namibia is an independent country. We're all Namibians. We love Namibia. But Namibia doesn't exist in isolation. Namibia is part of the world. And you will all obviously understand that traffic and transportation is, by its very nature, international. Transportation does not exist in its own little bubble. It's across borders. So in order to properly study and follow and become comfortable with the Namibian legislation, we first have to just take a step back and look at some international legal concepts. A request here that I must please record the lecture. I am recording the lecture. I can confirm that I am recording it. Okay, so today we are then looking at international transport laws that are also applicable to Namibia. Remember, while I'm just protocol, while I'm teaching, I'm focusing on the window that has my slides on it, so I cannot see you if you raise your hand. If you want to interrupt me, please do so. Just speak up or otherwise ask your questions in the chat box. So your learning objectives, always remember to go back to your learning objectives. Make sure that you have met them. So as I started off explaining earlier, Namibia does not exist in a bubble, especially with transportation. As far as transportation is concerned, our national Namibian laws, the Namibian transport laws that are applicable in Namibia, are a product of international law. We will look a little bit later in today's class at, for example, the Geneva Protocol, where you will understand how our national law is a product of international law. So first of all, just some basic terminology, some concepts. First of all, national law or domestic law, that is the law that exists within a particular country like Namibia. So the laws that are used in Namibia is domestic law, national law. We've already looked at the Namibian Constitution. We will spend a goodly time of the semester looking at the Road Traffic and Transport Act, as well as some other laws, Namibian laws that relate to traffic and transportation. National law, the law of a particular country. International law, the law that governs relations between different states, different countries. Where does international law come from? It comes from agreements, contracts, treaties, customs that are recognized by all nations. So international law, laws that regulate relationships between different countries. International transport law, obviously, international law which pertains to transport, laws that govern and regulate transport and transport-related activities. International law is derived from agreements or treaties. What are treaties? A treaty is simply an international agreement, a written agreement. A treaty is always in writing. A written international agreement concluded between different independent countries. Treaties are governed by the principles of international law. Treaties can be bilateral, meaning two, international agreement between two countries, or multilateral, an international agreement between three or more countries. We will look at some examples in the course of today's class. Sometimes, however, countries want to enter into an agreement, but it's not necessarily something that is going to be binding, something that if the one doesn't do what they've agreed to, that there can be court cases, etc. It's more just a cooperation agreement, a memorandum of understanding. What is a memorandum of understanding? An agreement between two or more countries that, in terms of which they work together towards a common goal. But it's not a formal contract, it's not a treaty, so there won't be consequences if the one doesn't do what the other one wants, etc., etc. Just an agreement, understand each other, to work together towards a common goal. Then these last ones, the last bullet point, ratification, acceptance, approval, accession. Those are all concepts that relate to how international treaties become binding law in a country. I've also given you on page 10, paragraph 2, a short description of the ratification process. You do not have to study that. You do not have to memorize the ratification process. Namibia is a sovereign state. What is a sovereign state? A sovereign state is a country that has full control over its affairs, existence, and territory. Like Namibia, Namibia is a sovereign state. We have full control over our own affairs, over our territory. But an important aspect is that we are recognized as such. We are recognized as a legitimate nation by other nations in the world. Major characteristics of a sovereign state is that a sovereign state has a defined territory. So it has borders. It has a defined territory on which the state exercises both internal control as well as external sovereignty, protects it from other countries. It has a permanent population. We have people that live here. We have an independent government, which is not under control of a foreign power, independent from other states and powers. And with all of that, we have the capacity to enter into relations with other countries. So those are the important characteristics of a sovereign state. With regard to the ratification process, some YouTube links there for you to watch if you want to learn more about that. So probably the most important international legal instrument which relates to traffic and transportation in Namibia is the Geneva Convention on Road Traffic of 1949. Don't have to remember the date 1949, but it is important that you remember the name, the Geneva Convention. A convention is another word for a treaty. A convention is a multilateral treaty, contract between various different countries, signed by these countries, whereby they agree on certain international principles. The Geneva Convention forms the basis of traffic and transportation law internationally, not just in Namibia, but internationally. It starts off by explaining itself. While Article 1 starts off with the words, while reserving its jurisdiction over the use of its roads, each contracting state agrees to the use of its roads for international traffic under the conditions set out in this convention. What does this mean in simple English? It means that the Geneva Convention recognizes that the countries that are part of this convention, that the member states are sovereign states. They make their own laws. As such, they have authority over their own roads, and the Geneva Convention is not dictating to them how they must make their laws or which laws they should have, sorry, or how they should manage their laws. Countries have authority over their national laws. But at the same time, because of the essentially international nature of traffic and transportation, the countries that are part of the Geneva Convention agree to implement the provisions of this Geneva Convention into their own respective national traffic laws, which leads to the harmonization of traffic laws worldwide. And you can obviously think to yourself that what the advantage would be of the harmonization of traffic and transportation laws all over the world. Now, Namibia was not a signatory. Namibia did not sign the Geneva Convention in 1949. We only became part of it in October 1993. Namibia became part of the Geneva Convention. Now, why do you think somebody that's, but wake up, tell me, why was Namibia not part of the Geneva Convention right from the start? Why did we only join later?
Because they were not independent.
Mishikesho?
Because they were still under colonialism of South Africans. They got independent by the 1990s.
Absolutely. See, I told you people that you are all smart and the subject is common sense. There was nothing difficult about that question, just a bit of clear thinking. Mishikesho is 100% correct. The Geneva Convention was signed in 1949. In 1949, there was no Namibia. Namibia didn't exist yet. So we couldn't become part of this convention. However, after our independence in 1990, a couple of years later, 1993, we became part of the Geneva Convention. Our own Road Traffic and Transportation Act, which we will be studying in detail in this course as we go ahead. Our own Road Traffic and Transportation Act is to a large extent based on the principles of the Geneva Convention. When our government legal advisors, legal drafters, Parliament decided we need a Road Traffic and Transportation Act, they sourced the concepts from the Geneva Convention. The Geneva Convention already existed, so there was no need for Namibia when they felt they had to, their Parliament had to accept their own act to reimagine the wheel, for example, by way of speaking, because there was already a wheel. So many of the concepts, specifically the definitions that are contained in our Road Traffic and Transportation Act, have their origin in the Geneva Convention. So why is the Geneva Convention important? What is its importance for Namibia? This is a discussion question that you can expect in your assessments. The Geneva Convention is important because it laid down the guidelines for international traffic law. What is the importance for Namibia? Our local, our national law is literally sourced from the Geneva Convention. Then moving slightly closer to home, namely SADC, Southern African Development Community. The Southern African Development Community regulates relationships between the member states by way of protocols. Now, a protocol is yet just another word for a multilateral treaty, for a convention, except they don't call, the SADC doesn't refer to it as conventions, they call them protocols, but they are the same thing. A memorandum of agreement, a contract between member states. There are numerous SADC protocols, lots and lots of them. For our purposes, the only one which is relevant is the SADC Protocol on Transport, Communications, and Meteorology of 1996. Purpose of the SADC Protocol was to create structures for the collective development of transport, communication, and meteorology within the SADC region. We study the SADC Protocol in a little bit more detail. So we will get to that in Unit 3. Next week's lecture, we will focus on the SADC Protocol. So those are the Geneva Convention and the SADC Protocol are the two most important international instruments. There are, however, a number of Namibia has entered into a number of contracts, agreements, bilateral treaties with its neighboring states. One of these, this is not the only one, it's just one that we use as an example, is the bilateral road transport agreement between Namibia and its neighboring country, Zimbabwe. It was entered into in 2000. We entered into a contract with the government of Zimbabwe to provide for a regulatory system so that there can be a free flow of goods and passengers between the two countries that are party to this contract, to promote the development of a strong and competitive road transportation industry, to ensure adequate levels of public safety in road transportation, to look after the infrastructure to guard against abuse of transport infrastructure, harmonized vehicle dimensions, road traffic safety rules, driver qualification standards. You can all think to yourself how important and how relevant this is. If somebody is driving from Zimbabwe to Namibia, their cars should not be too big for our roads. The qualifications, requirements for drivers should be similar. So if somebody that is regarded to be safe to drive in Namibia must also be safe to drive in Zimbabwe. And border control purposes, making it more efficient, making import and export simplifying import and export between the two neighboring countries. So as I said, this bilateral road transport agreement is not the only agreement that we have. We have a number of agreements. In a couple of weeks' time, when we are looking at cross-border transportation, when we're doing the Road Traffic and Transportation Act, and specifically cross-border transportation, we're going to be getting back, I'm going to be referring to these bilateral road transport agreements again. Just another example. This is a memorandum of understanding, so cooperation agreement, memorandum of understanding on the development and management of the Trans-Kalahari Corridor. International memorandum of understanding to develop this transportation corridor with the purpose of reducing transportation costs, facilitating the movement of goods and persons along this transportation corridor. Okay, so that is this. Today was just a short lesson, not very long.
Sorry, ma'am.
Yes. I'm not going anywhere. What was your question?
Just to ask, based on the convention bilateral agreement between Namibia and Zimbabwe, is it national, regional, or international transportation?
Between Namibia and Zimbabwe,
Zimbabwe.
I would classify it as regional. It's not just
Okay.
national because it's cross-border.
Yes.
But it's within the Southern African region, so I would classify it as regional.
Okay, ma'am. Thank you.
Any further questions? Okay, no further questions. Then we finished early. Thank you, for the thumbs up, Mr. Sisanda. Yes, so keep in touch on the WhatsApp group if you have any questions. And we will meet then next week. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.